I have never talked about this to anyone. I work in wildland fire now, with the Forest Service. Been doing it for 3 seasons. Before that, I worked for a contract crew doing fuels reduction in Southern Oregon, not far from Klamath Falls. I was a swamper back then. Worked with this guy named Marco. Small dude, maybe my age, 22. Long hair, real chill, amazing sawyer. He could take trees I wouldn't even think about touching. It was the end of the season. He and I got sent a bit north, outside of a little town called Ashwood, to drop a few trees for a prescribed burn coming up. We were taking lunch when it happened. Now, I know this sounds like one of those scary story videos, but I swear, this actually happened. I've told my mom about it, and she still laughs at me. Anyway, we were sitting on a big dead log, just talking. Marco was eating something out of a container, and I had a peanut butter sandwich. After a bit, I got up to take a leak. I had to walk through a bunch of brush to find a spot, maybe 30 feet away, just where the tree line started. There was some manzanita and low shrub out there. I started doing my thing, and when I looked up, Marco was standing there. Not 10 feet in front of me, smiling, waving like he'd just followed me into the woods. I froze. For a second, I thought maybe he'd messed with me and ran ahead somehow. But the manzanita was thick. No way he could have moved that fast. Then he raised his hand again, still smiling. I spun around and bolted back to our lunch spot. Didn't even bother zipping up. And there he was, Marco, sitting right where I'd left him, eating, looking confused. I tried to explain, but he just laughed. Thought I was pulling his leg. I've spent so many hours in the woods since then. I still cowboy camp all the time. I don't scare easy anymore. Can't afford to look like a wimp in front of my crew. But that moment right there, seeing him standing in those bushes, that's still the scariest thing that's ever happened to me.
Yeah, the knock that wouldn't stop. It started the night my neighbor disappeared. I remember because it was freezing. One of those November nights when the air itself feels sharp. The police were already on our street when I got home from work. Blue lights flickered against the bare trees, and an officer waved me around the cul-de-sac. I didn't know Mrs. Harding well, just enough to say hello when she watered her plants. But when they said she'd vanished without a trace, something in me went cold. I tried to shake it off, made some soup, turned on the TV. But around 10:30, there was a knock at my door. 3 knocks. Slow. Heavy. At first, I thought it was the police doing interviews, so I opened it without checking the peephole, but there was no one there. Just the porch light buzzing and the wind pushing at the hedges. I told myself it was kids, or maybe the wind had knocked something over. Locked the door, went back to the couch. At 11:15 it came again. 3 knocks. Same rhythm. "All right, cut it out," I shouted. "Not funny." Nothing. I grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen drawer and opened the door a crack. Again, but no one. But this time I noticed something strange. There were wet footprints on my welcome mat. Bare feet. Small, like a woman's. That's when I started to feel afraid. I closed the door, locked it, leaned against it, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock. Everything felt too quiet. I called my friend Mark. He lived 2 streets over. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "Did you hear anything weird tonight?" "No," he said. "Why?" "Someone's knocking on my door." "Twice now." "No one's there," he laughed. "Probably some prank. You watch too many horror movies." "Yeah," I said, though my voice didn't sound like mine. He offered to come by. I told him not to bother. I hung up, checked the locks again, and went to bed. I must have fallen asleep around midnight because I woke to a sound that made my stomach twist. Knock, knock, knock. It was softer this time, almost polite. I sat up, heart hammering. The sound wasn't coming from the front door anymore. It was coming from my bedroom window. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Then a voice whispered through the glass, "Please, let me in. It's so cold." It sounded like a woman. Her voice was shaking. I swallowed hard and reached for my phone. "Who is this?" I whispered. "Please," she said again. "He locked me out." I turned on the flashlight and, against every instinct I had, pulled back the curtain just enough to see. There was a woman standing in the yard, pale, barefoot, wearing a thin nightgown that clung to her like wet paper. Her hair was tangled and dripping, but what froze me wasn't her appearance. It was her face. It was Mrs. Harding. I stumbled backward, dropped my phone. My heart was pounding so loud it drowned everything else out. When I looked again, she was gone. I called the police. They came, searched the yard, the street, the woods, nothing. No footprints this time. No sign anyone had been there at all. The next morning, they found Mrs. Harding's body in the river. They said she'd been there for 3 days. I moved out a week later. And I still can't sleep when it rains. 'Cause sometimes when the wind picks up and the night gets quiet, I swear I can hear it again. Knock, knock, knock.
I told them you would come. I met him at the gym. Late evenings, when it was almost empty, he'd always be there. Headphones in, focused, lifting like the weight of the world sat on his shoulders. He smiled at me once while I was wiping down a treadmill, and that was it. We started talking. At first, it was normal. Coffee after workouts, late night drives for cheap meals, dinner dates that stretched past closing hours. He was funny, gentle, the kind of person who made you feel safe just by being near them. He'd listen closely when I talked, remembering small details I didn't even know I'd shared. There was something grounding about him, like no matter what was happening around us, he could steady the world with a look. After a few weeks, he told me he'd been diagnosed with schizophrenia. He said it carefully, like he was bracing for me to leave. But I didn't. I told him it didn't change how I felt. And for a while, it didn't. Sometimes he'd glance behind me mid-conversation, eyes darting to corners of the room. Or stop mid-laugh, listening to something I couldn't hear. He told me about the voices, how they whispered things that weren't real, and how he tried to ignore them. I nodded, told him I understood. I wanted to believe I could handle it. He said they weren't always cruel. Sometimes they'd tell him things he couldn't possibly know. Once he said one of them warned him I'd be late to meet him because of a flat tire. The next morning, it actually happened. I told myself it was coincidence, but part of me wondered if it was more than that. One night, after a late workout, he asked me to come over. His apartment was dim, blinds drawn. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. He seemed nervous, pacing as if he was waiting for someone else to arrive. Then he said quietly, "They've been asking about you." I laughed. "Who?" He looked at me with this strange calmness. "Them," he said. "The ones you can't see yet." I froze. He smiled softly. "I told them you would come." The room went still. At first, I thought the silence was too deep, but then I heard it. Faint murmuring, just under the hum of the fridge. Like a dozen people whispering at once, words overlapping, impossible to understand. I turned toward the sound, but there was nothing there. He tilted his head, almost lovingly. "You hear them now, too." I didn't answer. My throat felt tight and the air seemed heavier, thicker. My heartbeat drowned out everything, even the whispering. He was smiling like he'd just shared a secret, one I didn't want to be part of. His eyes had this look, relief and awe, like he was glad I finally understood. I left that night shaking, convincing myself it was just nerves, imagination, suggestion. But then, the whispers didn't stop. I heard them faintly in my apartment. Under the TV, in the shower, in the spaces between my thoughts. Sometimes they said my name. Sometimes they just breathed. When I closed my eyes, I saw flashes of movement like someone stepping just out of sight. I tried everything. Sleeping pills, music at full volume, leaving the lights on all night, nothing worked. The voices were patient, waiting in the quiet until I started to drift. And then they'd start again. Soft at first, almost comforting, like they didn't want to scare me. But the longer I ignored them, the louder they got. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. Every sound in my apartment started to feel alive. Then he texted me. "They like you. They said you listen better than I do." I blocked his number. Tried to forget him. But the voices didn't go away. Sometimes they'd mimic him. The same tone, the same phrasing, whispering things he used to say to me. "You look tired. You should rest. I missed you." It was him, but not him. Like a recording of something once human. Warped just enough to sound wrong. 3 months of torture. My doctor said stress can do strange things to the brain, that I probably absorbed his paranoia. But at night, when everything's quiet, I still hear them. The soft whispering, the breath against my ear. And sometimes, when the lights flicker, I swear I can hear his voice among theirs saying, "See? I told them you would come. I don't know if he's still alive. I never saw him again after that night. But sometimes, when I pass the gym on my way home, I think I see him through the glass. Headphones in, lifting in that same lonely rhythm, like nothing ever happened. When I blink, he's gone. Maybe he was never there. Maybe he never left. It's been years since that night. The voices are gone, but the memory isn't. Maybe that's why I chose this path, to understand what we fear and to help others who live with those voices every day. I'm studying clinical mental health counseling now, learning to walk beside those who wrestle with realities most of us can't see. Maybe, in some way, I'm still trying to help him too. Or maybe I'm just trying to prove to myself the voices were never real.